Modern-day slavery in New Jersey, up next on Carpe Diem. Hello and welcome to Carpe Diem. I'm Weaam Ali. The 2014 Super Bowl shed some light on the reality of human trafficking in New Jersey, where activists continue to raise awareness on this modern-day slavery crime. Whether it be sex slavery or forced labor, this crime can victimize any gender, race, age group, or even socioeconomic status. Community leaders have come together to discuss ways of eliminating human trafficking and training community members to become more aware. We've spoken to Danielle Douglas, a human trafficking survivor who shared her terrifying experience. Father Timothy Graff, Director of Human Concerns at the Catholic Church in Newark, who has worked in collaboration with law enforcement on behalf of immigrant victims, and Senator Tom Kean, who co-sponsored the legislation of Governor Chris Christie's Human Trafficking Prevention, Protection, and Treatment Act. Let's take a look.
I didn't even know what human trafficking was until about 3 to 4 years after I was out of pimp control. They deprive you of sleep, they deprive you of food, they beat you physically, they beat you mentally, and they keep you on your toes, so you don't have time to think about anything except how can I, what am I going to do in the next 5 minutes and how can I stay alive? The function of your brain basically stops. You have this amount of function compared to this. And I used that function to stay alive. I didn't have time to say, feel bad for myself, or even time to say, how can I get out of the situation? I had none. No thinking time, period.
The issue of human trafficking has raised concerns to community figures in New Jersey. Father Timothy Graff took part in initiating the Amistad movement after dealing one-on-one with victims from immigrant communities.
So the idea of the Amistad movement is to work with the leaders and the members of the different immigrant groups, especially those who are known to be most vulnerable in human trafficking, and to do training with them so that they can do several things. First of all, they can recognize people who might be possible victims of human trafficking, where it is that they work, where it is that they may congregate, ways in which they would talk to you or not talk to you, different characteristics that they could see. So first of all, it's the idea of identification. Second is the idea of education. Talking to these people about that which human trafficking is. What is the reality within their specific community? What it is specifically within their immigrant group where you would find victims. What kind of human trafficking would often afflict this particular group. And then finally, the idea is training so that they can share with their civic groups, with their churches, with their congregations, how it is that one would identify a victim of human trafficking, what to do when someone comes to you, how it is to refer, and all those basic tools that help people in these very vulnerable areas in these very vulnerable times in their lives.
In most cases, victims are afraid to report their traffickers because they feel their survival is constantly being threatened.
He had my mother's address. He had all my identification. He had my social security card. He had all my information. So I was afraid to leave because I was afraid of the consequences, that he would come and try to kill my family or hurt my family or try to kill me.
This raises a concern to Father Timothy Graff, who believes police authorities should pay more attention to this while identifying victims.
It's very underreported. Very few get caught. On the 150,000, maybe 140 cases have been found just in New Jersey. And New Jersey, in a certain sense, is a very prime area. We're near major airports. We're a major transportation hub. We're a very populated area. We tend to have a very transient population. We have a large tourist industry. Because especially within sex trafficking, what you find is there's a uptick in human trafficking when you have major sporting events. So we just had the Super Bowl, which brought a lot of attention to human trafficking. You have it when there are the Olympics. You have it around major political conventions. Anytime you have a large gathering of people, oftentimes the desire and the need for prostitution goes up. So that's certainly where the experience of sex trafficking would be an uptick, and why so much attention was given to New Jersey and New York over the last year was because of the Super Bowl. But one of the things that we're constantly saying is the problem was here before the Super Bowl, and the problem will be here after the Super Bowl. So it's the ability to keep the attention and the awareness ongoing.
I've learned that human trafficking is truly modern-day slavery. The word trafficking does not do justice to the horrific nature of a crime that forces, defrauds, and coerces an individual for the sole purpose of sexual exploitation or forced labor.
On May 6, 2013, the Human Trafficking Prevention, Protection, and Treatment Act was legislated into law by Governor Chris Christie. Senator Tom Kean was the first to co-sponsor the bill.
New Jersey is one of 2 states that has the most stringent laws and increased violations in regard to this abuse, of human rights abuse. And so what this piece of legislation did was, number one, create funding for victimization, so you can recover and make sure that people know what type of programs exist. It increased the violation so that you'd be able to identify what human trafficking violation was and increase the penalties in that regard. It made sure there's more information out so that more communities would know, and law enforcement officers would know how to figure out what signs were for these victimization.
So how can authority figures help victims without intimidating them?
Sometimes the state police, sometimes the FBI, sometimes national security. And so what they do is they come in and they're able to talk to the possible victim. It doesn't mean it works every time. Oftentimes there's still that distrust, but they'll say, here's my card. If you ever need me, if you're ever in a place, give me a call. Or they give them the number of the National Victims of Trafficking Hotline.
They're really trying to get better at working with victims of human trafficking, especially sex trafficking, and how to deal with that person in a way that will not re-victimize them, not traumatize them, not put them in a light as a criminal, because they're not. So I know they have been being trained, and they're working with a lot of nonprofits now, to where if they feel that human trafficking or sex trafficking is going on, they'll call in the nonprofits to come in and talk to the people first, instead of 5 men putting a girl in a room and yelling and screaming at her a million questions, because that doesn't work, especially with the human trafficking victims. So it's definitely getting better. We're on the right path now. We just have to keep going.
We have set the model, and we're really at the forefront, and any indicator will show that we're in the top 1 or top 2 states of laws. So many times when people are following New Jersey's lead, they don't always call up and collaborate. They simply introduce a piece of legislation, and then they're in the wake and they're following what we're doing. But my hope is that more states and more towns and more countries actually are involved in this, but also that people involved in the business leaders, the nonprofit leaders, the human rights leaders, the citizens. Everybody has to be involved in this, because everybody has to understand that the great responsibility that we all share in preventing this type of disgusting and systematic slavery and abuse.
Joining me now is Dr. Esmilda Abreu-Hornbostel, Director of Equity and Diversity, who has initiated the Campus Coalition Against Human Trafficking at Montclair State University, and Dr. Nicole Bryan, Director of Corporate Social Responsibility Initiatives on campus, who has also received a grant from Microsoft to study the role of technology in preventing human trafficking. Thank you for joining me.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. So not many of us know about human trafficking or what it is. Now, what exactly is the Coalition Against Human Trafficking on campus, and why did you feel the need to bring it on campus?
So Montclair State University is a public institution in the state of New Jersey. And as Father Tim Graff pointed out, New Jersey is a hub because of its location. We wanted to make sure that at a statewide level, we were ready to not only empower our students to act, but also be a resource for the other institutions around us and also to train future activists. So the Campus Coalition Against Human Trafficking is a resource on campus for information, but also for real action, real world action. So we've had experts from the FBI come and talk to our students. We go ahead and work with our university police, who are excellent, and we also make sure that the classes integrate the issues of human trafficking into the curriculum. So CCAT is pretty comprehensive.
Have you dealt with any victims on campus?
So we haven't had a victim per se that we've worked with on campus, but what we found is through the conferences that we've organized or through the fundraisers like Not for Sale, we've been able to make statewide connections and collaborations where we found victims in other institutions that we were able to help. The other thing we found is that parents, graduate students here, had victimized children. One case, we had someone that was actually being victimized by a family member in another country. But the parent, who was our student, needed us to act. And that was a moment for us to be able to organize because our university police was trained, because our administrators were trained, and because our students knew to be able to offer support. This student felt really held, and we were able to begin the investigation, get the process going. So that was a success story as far as I'm concerned.
Wow, that's really cool. And Nicole, I know you have a background in business.
Yes.
Right? And even the Microsoft grant you were given was from the School of Business. Now, how did the idea of bringing in your business background and studying technology collaborate with a humanitarian issue like that?
Great question. And I think, part of it is, yes, the grant from Microsoft went to the School of Business, but it's really to the university as well. And part of the approach that we have on the team of researchers working on this at Montclair is that we need interdisciplinary solutions. We need interdisciplinary ways of thinking, sort of diversity of thought to solve this problem. Business is part of it because business intersects, right? Okay. So human trafficking happens on business hours, at business locations. But business is also important for another reason, because a business perspective of problem solving and how to bring together different ideas and different groups of people, how to, for example, organize trainings and stuff, even those sort of basic business skills can be used. At the end of the day, it fits nicely with my interest in ethics and corporate responsibility, as well as what we're trying to build out in the School of Business around civic engagement, corporate responsibility, and how to partner with business and government and not-for-profit to really come together and come up with innovative solutions.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that because human trafficking is a $32 billion industry worldwide. In the United States, do you think that affects or reflects on our economy in any way?
Good question, very good question. There have, in the last few years, funding for human trafficking for a lot of research in a variety of things, including measurement, including how to respond effectively without causing more problems in the intervention, as well as how to actually measure the economic impact of human trafficking, has come to the attention. Mm-hmm. We're looking, those of us looking at economic impact are combining sort of economic and social impact. and what are the variables that we can use to look. So for example, different techniques can be used to measure lost revenue, for example, right? Those people, if now that revenue is obviously not taxed, what's the impact of that? As well as the social impact. There are even approaches that look at sort of healthcare impact down the line. If people then become dependent on the healthcare system, maybe obviously develop PTSD and these sorts of things. Why the economic is important, and it's important when I talk to business a lot, is I've found that when you engage with business, especially different members in the business community, you'll find sometimes a sort of comfort with or a desire to talk about, to do something about human trafficking, and even a motivation, and I would call those people champions. But the thing about champions is there's not that many of them, and what we need to do is we need to work together to arm the champions with the ROI story. What's the business case for this? Why this makes sense from a business perspective to address, whether it's reducing reputation risk or lawsuits, these kinds of things.
So here's an excellent example of champions. We had the Super Bowl here in New Jersey, and one of the things that the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking did was get everyone involved in this project called SOAP. And so one of the things that traffic victims don't have is a lot of privacy, but sometimes they're able to get away and wash up. So we knew that if we got them in the bathrooms, we would be able to give them that number that might lead to their safety eventually or their rescue. So we got a whole bunch of students and activists from all around New Jersey to put a label on the hotel soaps and leave that information all around New Jersey in hotels and motels. Those hotels that said, yes, we're going to be part of that solution and we're going to allow you to do this to our brand, our soap, those are champions. I also want to talk about the issue of poverty. We're in a global economy, and so in the past we used to think about the United States as a place for consumption of traffic victims, not harvest, right? Now what we're finding is because of the economy, some of our American segments are being seen as harvest segments. And some of our population right here in New Jersey are being harvested as young as 12 years old.
And what exactly do you mean by harvested?
Sadly, because they use business terminology, the way we think of human beings is crops. And so traffickers will think of crops. Crop from Thailand, a crop from the Dominican Republic, a crop from Paterson, New Jersey. And that harvest then is put out there for consumption. The consumers then decide what kind of variety of product they would like to partake in. It's very sad.
And like you mentioned, it comes directly to New Jersey. So many people are interested, so many highways in New Jersey, so many ports. So it's pretty much the perfect spot for it to happen in a way, and so many people get away with it. And I wanted to ask, how has academics helped you in terms of reaching out on a national level?
You know, that's a very interesting question, and I'll say there are a lot of people doing great work, anti-trafficking work. There are a lot of people who are starting to get involved in policy. So we have academic researchers, we have private sector, we have public. What I have found as an academic researcher is it helps me even in getting buy-in, because there can be resistance sometimes to doing this kind of work. And if you're a private company, for example, well, why would this company be interested? They must have a scandal that they're trying to cover up. If it's a not-for-profit, oh, they're moral do-gooders. They just want to, they have bleeding hearts and they just want to change the world that way. That'll never work. And then government just wants to follow people and oppress people or regulate people, right? So everybody has different perspectives. But I will say, as an academic researcher, you gain a little bit of purity if you are able to phrase it as, well, I just want to see what works. I just want to see what this is about. I just want to see it from a research perspective. And I have found personally that that's been very helpful for me in especially working collaboratively and bringing people together. Because I don't have a profit mechanism, I'm not trying to regulate. And maybe in my heart I'm a moral do-gooder, but I'm not presenting that way. So.
Which is interesting because I teach women and gender studies, and for me, critical theory has a component of power and oppression. And I actually want to create activist scholars who are not only studying it, but then thinking about creative, innovative solutions to address the problems. So I think that academics is going to come at it in many different ways.
Which is good. So let's like bring back the Microsoft grant.
Yeah.
And I know you're doing research, right? So what have you found in your studies? What kind of groups of people did you speak with? Have you spoken to traffickers maybe?
Okay, a lot of questions. I'm going to piggyback on what actually Dr. Bruce said as well on the innovation part, because that's actually really how this grant came about from Microsoft. They were looking at, as they look at all global problems, right, and trying to figure out what is it that they could do, should do, from an innovation perspective to address human trafficking. And there are a lot of companies in Silicon Valley who are working together collaboratively on this as well to try to see what is the role that technology may play in, unfortunately, facilitating, but then also as a solution provider, what kind of innovative things can technology companies do? So with that, that just kind of connects the Microsoft as well as what Dr. Abreu was saying. But on the question regarding research, and so there's a few different parts. In this case, the idea was to look at how technology plays a role, how it facilitates, how it brings about or may allow for trafficking to occur. So of course, in that case, we're looking really online in the Microsoft, but trafficking also is facilitated through technology, without advertising, for example, through the use of mobile phones, or even in labor trafficking, right? So part of the idea was to find out how people use network technologies in the process. So whether it's in the recruiting process, in the transaction process, in the after process, which involves a review, like a TripAdvisor style review on how people performed. So all of these different aspects. And so the idea is to look at the different ways that network technology is integral to the sort of life cycle, and then also combined with that, different ways that it can be disrupted. The particular people that I'm interviewing for this study is people who are actually buyers or customers or Johns, however we call them. And the idea of that is to find out how they identify who they would like to meet with, how they search, how do they learn the words? Is it sort of a casual thing? Do they know it's trafficking? Do they know it could be trafficking? The range, and really to get an understanding of what the different profiles are from a buyer perspective, so that we could help inform solutions that would actually match up with their profiles. So if someone is a sort of newbie on the fence, a different intervention online might affect them in a way that it wouldn't affect, let's say, a convicted pedophile, right? So what the mindset of the buying behavior or the searching behavior will help also inform sort of smart, innovative, responsible intervention, we hope. On the other side, another member of the team is looking at the content analysis and chat room analysis and looking at the community role. So Dr. Pochke is looking at that to figure out, does the fact that we have community groups like TripAdvisor style places, or places where you have to actually get to a higher level in order to get more in detail information, does that normalize the behavior? Do we now take the behavior from, as he says, being in the basement to now being out in the open for everybody, and therefore it's acceptable? So we're looking from that perspective.
And the reason that this is so exciting, I mean, I love what Dr. Bryan is saying as far as the way that she's looking at usage and technology, is because we are growing and creating consumers. So demand has gone up. You know, human trafficking used to be the third largest illegal crime in the world, right? After drug trafficking, and then arms trafficking being the first one. Now it's second, arms, humans, and drugs. So how'd that shift happen at a global level? Well, it happened because technology made it easier, because it came from the basement and the alleys into an open space where people said, sure, I'm gonna take a tour. And in my tourism package, I've got this, sample of women or children, and that kind of understanding is going to be our access of figuring out how are these consumers being groomed and developed, and how do we reverse this increase in demand. It's huge.
And there has actually been a lot less focus on demand. until in the last year, we now are starting to appreciate that, you know, the campaigns that we have to try to change behavior are not going to work for all people. So we have to even be more customized in our approach. And that requires understanding what the behavior is about and speaking specifically to the different sort of segments in that. So you will see in the next year a bigger push on getting smarter about how to do anti-demand.
Okay. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I really wanted to ask about the victims. How do they feel about their positions? Do they ever feel like it's their fault in any way? Do they feel like they perhaps deserved it?
Well, I'm going to take that right away. Is absolutely. One of the things that the pimps and the traffickers do is systematically chip away at ego and ability to self-care. There is pure survival. They'll also use their cultural backgrounds against them. So for example, they'll use some religious and spiritual components in Nigerian girls so that Nigerian girls and women, for example, are very docile because they feel like they have been stripped away spiritually. Others, they use the leverage of the family and understanding that my honor is lost, therefore my ability to go back to my family is impossible because I've shamed my family. So if they think about, let's say, Ukrainian culture, they might use that approach. Others might use the approach of, you know, physical violence or threatening family members. And so they do feel victimized, again, in the sense that they begin to internalize culpability.
And just one last question. What can someone young like me do to help a victim out?
Well, the first thing is get informed, watch this show, right? The other thing is become part of a coalition. It is a worldwide problem. It needs to be addressed as a group. And then finally, be careful about what you do. There's a wonderful website called myslaveryfootprint.org. You can go and actually see, what do I buy? What do I consume? How do I think about products? And how am I adding to the problem? And then take ownership and do something.
Nice. And unfortunately, we're out of time, but I'm so happy I spoke with you guys, and I'm sure in the future we'll do greater things to change this. If you would like more information on this or any other edition of Carpe Diem, you can write to us at the email address on your screen, carpediem@mail.montclair.edu, or call us at 973-655-5158. For Carpe Diem, I'm Weaam Ali. Thanks for watching.